Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're so happy that you're here with us. We're those friends that you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I'm Anne, and I am here with my two good friends and Springs in the Desert teammates, Jillian and Alissa. Hey, ladies.
Hello.
We are really planning a great episode, I think. Something that is close to each one of us and something that we hear from all of you in feedback in emails and on social media, and that is kind of how to navigate being a faithful Catholic in our parishes, in the pews, and dealing with our infertility. You know, when we are going through this particular struggle, we can often feel kind of very separated, I think, from our parish families. You know, we talk a lot in Springs in the Desert about that isolation that we feel going through infertility, those feelings of shame or feeling like we don't belong. And it's particularly difficult in the context of our parish family, because that's really the place where we should feel just the most comfortable and the most safe, right? Because, you know, we're in God's house. But we don't always feel that way. And sometimes it's pressure that we put on ourselves, but it's also our friends and neighbors in the parish who maybe don't understand what this struggle is like. And even in some cases, our own pastors, maybe we are afraid to share with them about the struggle, or, you know, people in our parish may have made comments, asked intrusive questions, and we just feel very uncomfortable sharing this burden with anyone. So we want to talk about that today, really honestly, and try to think about some practical ways that the people around us, especially in our parish, can help us and support us. And we have Alissa and Jillian on today because all three of us have experience in ministry. So we have that experience of being on the side of women who walk that path of infertility in our different experiences. But we also have that experience in doing ministry. So we kind of see it from both sides of the fence. So we thought that this would be a really fruitful conversation, and kind of getting both of those perspectives. So I think a lot of people have met both of you on podcast episodes before. You both have written for the blog, but why don't you just kind of give a little bit of your story, your personal story, and then your experience in ministry. So let's start with you, Jillian.
Sure. So I am married. I lost two children to miscarriage a few years ago, and am now kind of working through inability to conceive, sort of a secondary infertility group there. And I have a bachelor's in theology, and I currently use that in parish ministry in a parish in Dickinson, North Dakota. And so I actually have not yet written for the blog, but I have one coming up in April. So be on the lookout for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Jillian. Now, Alissa, you have a very interesting way in which you participate in ministry. So why don't you share with us about that?
I do. I'm a little bit of a token over here. My husband is Father Paul West. We are a Byzantine Catholics, so our clergy is allowed to be married. So in 2016, well, it was a little before that, but Paul and I started a conversation about him becoming a priest. We had already been married for several years, and it was kind of surprise, let's change everything. but it worked out really well because now we're in this really great ministry. So I started my infertility journey long before I met him. I was diagnosed with PCOS in my early 20s. So even when we first got married, before all this priest clergy family thing came up, I knew it was going to be something, a hurdle to overcome. Fast forward into our marriage, and we started trying to have children. Nothing was working. So a few years in, we ended up, getting some treatment, taking some medications. I became pregnant, lost my first one to miscarriage. And then a little while later, we were able to conceive my daughter, who she's 8 now. And then we said, you know what, let's try this one more time, see if we can roll the dice and have some more blessings from above. And we ended up with my son, Nick, who just turned 5 in January. So we had the primary infertility experience. We had the secondary infertility experience. And at this point in our journey, we are going to let it happen how it happens. We're not working hard to try for anything else. We said that that's a hurdle. We're kind of a roller coaster that we're just kind of like, if it happens, it will. And if it doesn't, we feel peaceful about, where we've come. So the interesting part of it is having this perspective of the pastoral side of it, being a priest's wife, seeing the inner workings and meeting all different clergy from all over, the Eastern Seaboard. We're here near Philadelphia, so we just have met so many different people in so many different cities. So it's an interesting perspective, and it's been an interesting journey. So hopefully we'll get some of that out tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that, Alissa. And also, I just want to mention that Father Paul is the spiritual father for the Springs in the Desert ministry. So, he also brings, I think, just that rich kind of perspective and understanding and compassion to this ministry. That's so wonderful. And it's great to have him and to have you, Alissa, especially when we think about this particular topic. Who are we in this struggle with infertility in the midst of our parish family? Like, where do we belong? Where do we fit in? And how can we ask people for support? How can we share with them and with our pastors too, the kind of support we need? So that's why I think this will be a really fruitful conversation. My experience in ministry is at the diocesan level, working in marriage prep and family life office, and also adult faith formation. So, I have that experience of working with young couples before they take that leap into marriage. And when I think back on that time that I did marriage prep, for part of that time I was single, and then newly married, and just beginning to think about starting a family, and not yet really immersed in that whole infertility journey yet. So I can see, looking back now, how important it is to really talk with couples as they're preparing for marriage. Alissa, you mentioned that before you even married, you had a diagnosis, and you knew that things could end up being a little bit difficult.
Yeah, and in some odd way that it was very helpful. It was still, I remember grieving a loss before I was even married, having gotten that diagnosis so early. But in the end, it was like I already had some armor on, in a way, to know that I was going to have to probably face, that struggle as we went on. So.
Yeah, I feel like this could be a whole episode of its own, talking about preparing for marriage, and we get that feedback very often, that people will say that they wish infertility had been something that was discussed as they were preparing for marriage. So we'll have to save that for another episode. But for now, let's dive right into this idea of what it's like to be a Catholic, a faithful Catholic, in a marriage where, you're desiring children, you want to follow the church, you want to follow God's call to be fruitful. And when that becomes maybe not only a challenge, but something that, year after year doesn't come to fruition, what are the kinds of feelings or experiences that each of you have had from that side, not from the ministry side, but just from the personal side? Jillian?
Yeah, I think two things that come to mind, which are both. Well, I'd say the first one is a good thing that happens, but it's not received very good in my heart. I think the first is that, a question you're often asked when you meet people is, "Oh, how many children do you have?" And I have really challenged myself on a personal level to not do that anymore with anyone I meet, not just in a parish community, but yeah, especially there. There's been several times from pastors, from just different people in there, in the parish community who will say, "Oh, are you gonna go? Do you need to make supper tonight for you and your husband and the children?" And of course, it's coming from a place of good, and but it does put a lot of assumptions onto a person to respond to. And I would say in my circumstance, having had losses, I then am constantly put into this position that I either say, no, I don't have children, and feel like I am not honoring them. But I don't really feel like everyone needs to know that loss, or I have to open myself up constantly to honor them, and that's usually what I take if I have the energy. But that's that's one thing, is that you're usually asked just, "Oh, how many children do you have?" So I try to challenge myself to think outside the box, to ask other questions about someone. But that's one thing that I receive. And then I would say the second challenge for me on a personal level is I often feel like assumptions are made about our choices, which is really hard because I care a lot about what people think of me, and maybe sometimes to a fault. But I never want people to assume that my husband and I are using contraception, or that um, we don't want children, or that we aren't open to life, or you could, fill in the blank with other assumptions that are made. And that's yeah, been really hard because and of course this is not everyone. I want to avoid hasty generalization, but I do know a lot of dear friends of mine who either were in the church or are Catholic, who do practice some of those things in their marriage, and it's really hard to defend why we're not doing that. When that's sort of the assumptions that people are making. So I would say that just questions that are really difficult to answer, that are well intentioned but not the best questions, and then just assumptions that are made, whether they're said to us or not, are hard.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And it, you know, it occurs to me that what you said is true. Oftentimes very innocuous and even well-meaning
Mm-hmm.
kinds of questions, but posed with making a lot of assumptions. And when I look back to my life, even prior to marriage, I am ashamed to admit, but I had those same kinds of thoughts of, about people. And so it's a real lesson for us to not just look at people and judge their situation. And even if that's something that you think is happening, maybe instead start praying for that couple or for that person,
Yes.
and then I guess on my side, as someone going through infertility, when I can, to find those ways to try to be generous and to have a generous and charitable interpretation or response. But you're right, sometimes you don't have the energy for that,
Mhm.
and it's hard. Yeah. Alissa, you
Especially,
oh,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, please finish.
I think to that question, or some of those questions are often just asked um, very, I don't know, without intention.
Mhm.
So they're kind of flippant, and so the same person might ask you that same question 2 or 3 times because they weren't actually listening. They just wanted to be pleasant. And so that can be a challenge too, because I want to be generous. I want to maybe even take advantage of an opportunity to be fruitful for them to see, oh, okay, maybe I'm going to ask that different the next time.
Mhm.
um, but when I've said it 2 or 3 times to someone that I am being vulnerable to, but they aren't receiving well, that can be tricky to keep up the generosity for, but something I
Yeah.
certainly could work on.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Alissa, you have again an interesting kind of perspective from your vantage point as the wife of a priest.
Yes, it is an interesting spotlight that tends to shine on clergy family. Um, Before Paul was ordained and before seminary, even when we were working through our journey of infertility, um, I it seemed, I don't want to say easier, but it was, my instinct was to flee if I was feeling super emotional, or if people were asking me questions or anything like that. There were definitely Sundays where I'd be in the pew crying and I'd be like, it's over, I'm out. And I can't do that anymore because it's over and everyone wants to talk to me now. So I find that I have kind of um, I it's a strange combination of being vulnerable, but also putting up that armor, like I was talking about before. Um, I I see lots of different people in lots of different churches as well, and they all know me as Father Paul's wife, and so it's not always the same group of people asking me the same questions. It's this group of people here and this group of people over in this city, and so it's from all over. And so I find that now I am just utterly honest. And I think that I would not have gotten to that point if I didn't have to keep being in this spotlight. Um, and it's freeing on one hand, but at the same time, like, that shield is constantly up. So it's like you need a break from that shield sometimes to just like let yourself fall apart sometimes. Um, but and it's not something that it came instantly, and it's not something that everyone is able to do, to just put it all out there, because like you guys said, it takes a lot of energy. But I do find that if I do that, um, people start to listen. If I use the big fancy words of diagnoses and um, just anything that sounds official, people are like, oh, okay, wow. And then a lot of times too, not every time, but people will have more questions, and it's almost like my ministry as a priest's wife kind of can move into the ministry with the springs in the deserts type things, where I can teach them about what infertility, being Catholic, means. So it's like it's this dichotomy of vulnerability and needing to be tough, and soapboxes and needing to fall apart. And so it's interesting. And yes, go
Yeah,
ahead,
no,
Jillian.
Alissa, I really love that image of the armor, kind of coming down. I'm forgetting when this podcast will air, but this past Lent, we had our walking with Christ, and we were walking through the Stations of the Cross, and it has really just brought alive a lot of different events that happened on Jesus's walk to Calvary. And that image that you gave me really gave me, it shone, there was a light brought to Jesus falling, because even he, fell 3 times. And so there's this holiness to letting that armor down. There is this act of virtue in allowing yourself to fall, and then another bit of sanctity in picking it back up and getting back up. So I like that image, that there's, because I think sometimes we get and I think we've talked about this on other podcasts, you get the feeling that you have to do so much. You always have to be put together, and you've got to handle it with grace in every moment. And Jesus fell, so to see him as our example, and not the world giving us their example of what virtue, holiness looks like. God fell.
Yeah.
That's, and not that falling doesn't have to be a bad thing or an immoral thing or something. It really, there's an act of holiness, of surrender, of I need a break from this armor.
It's interesting that, going back to Christ falling, it's like he had the courage to fall, and sometimes it's even harder to muster that, because like you said, you always feel like you need to be put together, and yeah, absolutely, totally agree with that.
I love that imagery. I love this spark of the Holy Spirit just entering the conversation, because, Alissa, you're part of this ministry, but I guess I never thought your personal kind of struggle and having to be in the spotlight as the priest's wife was, a way for you to minister. Because to me, I lose the energy too. Like, I get tired of answering the questions. So the fact that you're able to take that and channel that into a way of ministry, I think is beautiful. But the image that you both just brought about Christ falling, and the courage to fall and surrender, and also to get back up and continue to carry the cross, I think that kind of gives us a little bit of a blueprint and a motivation for balancing that, trying to be generous, striving to be generous, but knowing that we don't have to always try to hold ourselves up. Like, we can let ourselves fall. And it's okay if we don't have the energy to explain once again, why we don't have children, why we come every Sunday just by ourselves. So I think that's a beautiful image that, we can all sort of ponder and maybe kind of keep in mind when we are running that gauntlet, after church, or when we're in the hall for the event and people are mingling and talking. And that tends to be when those kinds of questions come up. Yeah, thank you for that image. So I think that kind of, sets the scene for us. Now, how do we navigate that? What are some ways that we can maybe ask for help? Let people know how we need to be accompanied, or even from a ministry side, or from the side of a pastor, how can we help them to sort of help us and accompany us? And I might go to you first, Alissa, since you are living in a house with a priest, and just from that perspective of talking to your pastor, that's hard. And we get that feedback from people. They will email us and say, my pastor doesn't know how to help me, and I don't know how to ask for help.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one because obviously I'm comfortable going to my priest. He's my husband, so that's not a problem in my personal life. But I have, again, gone to many different churches, and I know a lot of priests, and I know a lot of seminarians who will one day be priests, and it I find that they all have different personalities. They're, as we all do. Some of them are very open and warm and loving. Some of them are a little more formal. And so it's hard to judge how to approach different people, and tying that in with all, the questions of things like, oh, when's the next one coming? Or we got a question once, why did you wait so long before you started? Things like that. They're, again, well-meaning. It's not like they do it to hurt you, but it's tricky because you don't know the response you're going to get. But what I have found is that despite the responses that you may get, every priest that I've ever spoken to about this has, or anything really, they're human. They have that compassion. They wouldn't be priests if they didn't have that compassion. And so even if you get strange answers that are uncomfortable, I was thinking about it. Maybe they're just uncomfortable talking about it just as much as you're uncomfortable going to them. It's not something that they might think about often. And then I was even thinking, on the flip side of that, most priests have made a conscious decision to be celibate as well. So perhaps it might touch a nerve for them that they had to decide not to have a family. So there's so many different dynamics of what the priest might be experiencing and what you might be experiencing. But I think in the end, every priest I've ever talked to has that compassion. And sometimes it takes longer to get to a place where you can comfortably talk to that person, but it's there. And I think if they're patient with the parishioners that are coming to them, and we as parishioners are patient with them, I think we could bridge that gap, and find the words to speak to each other and get that help and that spiritual guidance through the struggle. So that's pretty much my experience. Just sticking with it, and they're there for you. It just might not feel like it immediately. So
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to just, you know, in some cases not being aware, or as you said, being uncomfortable too, and wanting to help, but maybe because they don't have the answer, the solution, they're not comfortable. And so
and they're men too, and just stereotypically men are fixers, and so if they can't fix it, what do I do? That's
right.
total generalization, broad brushes, but in general, that's kind of how it seems.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you. So, you know, uh, I think if we can, to find the courage to go to our priest, he's our pastor, he's our father, and just express those feelings. If you feel like you can't do that, if that's too hard, um, you know, pass along a podcast episode, or we have some resources on the Springs in the Desert website. Send them. Somebody emailed and said that she felt it was too hard to talk to her priest. And I said, well, give me his address and I'll send something to him. I mean, we'll do that, because I know it was only last year that I went to my own pastor and talked to him about Mother's Day, and if there were some different ways that he could handle that blessing, to help make all of the women a little bit more comfortable. Not to say let's not honor moms, but but to just be sensitive to those women who don't have children, and and who are really struggling. So it does take a certain amount of courage. But I think you're right, Alyssa. I think for the most part, priests are waiting there to kind of meet us in the middle. They may be afraid to take that first step too, if they have a sense that that there's something that we're struggling with. Jillian, how about you, from a ministry side? What are some ways that we can, you think, better sort of as a church, be with and accompany people who are carrying this cross?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate what you guys just said there, and Alyssa too. Your connection with the celibacy of the priesthood. That there's a lot there, I think, and I'm not sure that that's really been talked about much. That really, I think they're really the ones who might understand it the most, but maybe just haven't had the opportunity to really formulate that, to help serve a community who's, not necessarily in the same situation, but has similar tones. Um, I would say just a few practical things that I've found in my experience at parishes. One, yeah, I just want to echo what you're saying, to have the courage to, even if it's not your pastor, maybe there's a staff member or a volunteer who's there a lot, a deacon, maybe someone, maybe even at the diocesan level, that you could share something with. Find just someone that you could say, maybe it is about Mother's Day, or maybe it's about, yeah, just different ways that the community is addressed, parents, or, you know there's oftentimes different, or even in the bulletin, sometimes things are addressed in certain ways that kind of excludes a lot of the population of the parish. And so just to, maybe even just mention that. I know some people, for instance, at my last parish, a grandmother was the guardian of her granddaughter. And we had been addressing everyone as parents, thank you, parents, for coming. And she had come up and just wrote on a little feedback form, had just said, it would be really great if you could say parents and guardians, because not everyone here is the parent. And um and so we did, and it totally changed the environment. Even if for one person it was worth it, and it's changed my ministry, the way that I speak to people and address them. So she didn't talk to our pastor. She yeah, and even finding ways like that, like a feedback form after events. Finding, maybe, I know there are many parish websites that have like a note form, that you can leave a comment on the website, or you can, many parishes also have just a general email, so you don't have to send it to anyone in particular. It's like, for, it might be office at St. Michael's, or office at, so you could just send an email. You could be even more anonymous, and maybe you could write a letter if that's helpful. Just yeah, finding whatever way that the Lord is asking you to be courageous, and do that. I think that there's ways to say that. And then I think too, also just being a part of it, being a part of the solution to those things. If maybe your pastor is not, is overwhelmed. Maybe you're at in North Dakota, we have a lot of rural parishes that have very low staff numbers, and everyone is overwhelmed. And so to hear someone say, I would really like to help you do this, is like Christmas morning, to get someone who's willing and able to help. Because I also don't know what everyone's gifts are, or what everyone's passions are. And so for some, maybe you just want to create maybe a little gift package or something for mothers that in the parish that whether they're spiritual mothers they've lost, or those who don't have any children due to infertility or whatever the case is. Maybe you want to put together a gift package or something for them, or maybe you'd like to send a card, or start sort of being part of the solution, because I guarantee you're not the only one who's looking for support. And so to find something that's helpful to you, I know this is sort of when my personal and parish ministry comes together, but I was struggling at my last job with some comments that a staff member was making, totally unintentional. But because I had gone to my pastor and told him that we had miscarriages and that this was really difficult, he addressed it so that I didn't have to speak up. He said, actually, like, the correct terminology is this, and just said, hey, could you be mindful that there are maybe people here who don't have children and would love that? And so he slowly started remembering that in different times. So yeah, I would just like to echo the courage. Be courageous in whatever way. Email, you could set up an appointment, you could talk to anyone, it doesn't have to be the pastor. And then just try to find a way, maybe come up with one way of something that would bring you comfort, and maybe pitching that as an idea to the parish. Something simple so that, especially if they have low staff, that it could still be done, but something that would still offer support.
I love all those ideas, Jillian, especially some of those more practical ones that you had that don't just involve talking to the pastor, but doing something, writing cards, or putting together care packages, those kinds of things. Because when we can kind of move outside of ourselves even a little bit, that really does help. That really does help us carry the burden. It might seem kind of strange, but in doing service to others, we really do find a lot of comfort in that.
Yeah, I also liked, I had forgotten to mention, but what you had said, and I find myself too when I see other couples that I know have been married for however many years, rather than assuming things that I don't want people to assume about me or anyone, offering them in my daily prayer. I think sometimes we think that prayer is a very light and sort of airy, it's kind of a band-aid or something, like, oh, I'll pray for you, without real intention. But, prayer is conversation with God. It is the work of the church is prayer. So I think, like, that is the most practical, effective thing that we could do. And when I was at my last parish, at one point, there were 47 women that I knew close to me who were all pregnant at the same time.
Oh my goodness.
I was getting very overwhelmed. It felt like every week someone new was announcing, and I said, okay, this is going to very quickly become frustration, anger, maybe resentment, if I don't do something for them, if I don't enter into this journey that they're in. And so I wrote them in a list on my phone, and every day I would read through their names and I would pray for them. I've also, prior years to that, there were about 10 women in my life who were really struggling with fertility. And so every day I offered prayers for them, and 9 out of 10 of them have conceived since then. And I'm not saying that my prayer was the thing that made them conceive, but I know it was part of it. I believe that my prayer, my petition to God on their behalf, was part of the process, was part of His will. So yeah, just pray for all those people, that it became kind of a way. None of them know that I've prayed for them. None of them knew that I was sort of carrying their cross with them. But it's really powerful.
Wow, what a just beautiful manifestation of fruitfulness and of your spiritual motherhood. I love that. Ladies, this time has flown by.
Yes.
I feel like we could do another episode just continuing the conversation. And I think we'll probably have to do that at some point. But I think that this was really great. And what I'd love to invite everyone to do is to contact us. If you have any great ideas, some things that you have done to help bring awareness in your own parish or among your family and your friends that help them to help you as you carry this cross, please let us know. If you'd like to talk to a team member because maybe you don't have that courage right now to reach out to your own pastor, let us know. You can email us at info@springsinthedesert.org. If you want to get the perspective specifically of Alissa and Jillian from their experiences in ministry, just email us. And, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to connect with you and help you carry this cross as you really try to be fully immersed in the family of God in your parish. So thank you, Jillian and Alissa. This was great.
Yeah,
Thank you. This was great.
Thanks.
So thanks, everybody. And until the next time, God bless you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. If you have a minute, please rate and review us so that we can reach more listeners. Check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and hear about more things that we have going on. Most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.